Jim, how do we get that little strip right there to go away? Sorry. Better? Okay, do you still see it on Zoom?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I'm not going to go through the first few again. I'll just show the pictures just so you see it.
Yes, sir.
Here's the different variable shape, color, sizes that I was talking about. And then here's the map showing all the Phragmipediums family, subfamily distributions. And then that brings us back to where we were with a close-up of the countries. And they range from the lowland warm climates all the way to cooler climates. But the biggest thing is they're always near a source of water. You're going to hear that a lot through the course of today about how important water is, constant water is to the roots of these orchids. And also, they're always in areas of higher than normal air movement and not in stale, stagnant air conditions like down here where I grew up in the swamp. So Phragmipediums and lady slippers in general differ from non-slipper orchids in two main ways. The first is they have a closed pouch instead of an open lip, as you see with the Phalaenopsis on the right. And also the two lateral sepals on the phale are fused together to form one synsepal. So that's how you can differentiate the lady slippers. Now on the cutout slide, the cutout of the lip there on the left of the Phragmipedium longifolium, you can see that this is meant to attract and then trap an insect inside the pouch. The only way out forces the insect to exit the pouch right behind the staminode and anther, which makes contact with the pollen and then the stigmatic surface. Now, for those of you down here, what is this what does that pouch look like with the recurved sides? What does that remind you of down here in South Louisiana? Like a crab trap or a crawfish trap, right? They come in, you got a funnel, and they can't come out. Same thing here. Once they fall into this pouch, they come up the wall, but they're blocked. It forces them all the way out, only in one direction. Now, 7 species are known to be autogamous, means they self-pollinate. And 3 of them are 100% autogamous. So you have to make sure you cut those spikes so every single flower will set a pod, especially if you want it to keep blooming in succession. Many are pollinated by the Syrphid family of flies, known as the hover flies, and different species of the typhid wasps and small bees. So if you look here on the right picture, you'll see that we have these little green dots right in the middle of the pouch. And these are markings that simulate the aphids. So you got the parasitic wasps flying around. They think those are aphids. It draws them into the pouch of this plant. The lip is slippery, which facilitates capture. The insect falls down into the pouch. And then the center picture, you can see how the only way out once they're trapped inside the pouch is to come up from the rear, up and out behind the anther. They get pollen stuck to it, flies to another flower, same thing. And that's what we call trap morphology. There's a little central row of hairs usually in each of the pouches that facilitate climbing out like a little ladder. In my experience with pollinating frags, this is what I've observed. So from pollination of a flower to harvest in the pod, you're looking at about 2 to 5 months, depending on the temperature. If you're using the long tails, which I'll talk about here in a minute what long tails are, you're looking at about a 12-month pollination, which is pretty long. From seed sowing to compotting, you're looking at 1.5 to 2 years. And then they begin blooming 3 to 4 years from compotting, depending on if it's miniature or standard genetics. I've had them bloom, the little mini ones bloom in about 2.5 years. If you notice that's a mature seed pod about to split. It doesn't get really big like our Cattleya seed pod. So you don't get a whole lot of seeds And you'll notice when you're buying Phragmipediums online, they're fairly expensive plants. And they just don't get a whole lot of viable seed out of a cross, and it just takes time to grow up. So you see a little bit higher price tag on them. Now this chart shows all the genera of the Phragmipedium genera as compiled by Dr. Guido Grimm in 2014. There's a couple species that are newer since then that aren't on here, but we got 29 species grouped into 7 sections. Over time, Phragmipediums have been subjected to much taxonomic reclassification. They're always finding out, well, this one was named something earlier than this one. It always goes back to the original name. So this has happened a lot. Your taxonomists do not agree with each other in a number of cases here on several of these plants. But anyway, by Dr. Grimm, this is his list. The ones in yellow are variations of other species, but they have enough differences that we can, they were independently described. And at first they were described as a species and then later lumped as a variation. So here are your taxonomists that are responsible for the recent naming and renaming of the Phragmipedium genus. Leslie Garebe in 1979, he classified them based on their staminode shape. And then you have all the big names here, Dressler and Dr. Grimm, Olaf Russ, Philip Cribb, Franco Pupilin. And then last is Frank Cervera, who in recent years, he's proposing a species concept, which is a little different. He proposes, we'll talk about that in just a minute, but it's a different take on how he feels the species should be classified. So alpha taxonomy is based on type specimens. This is how all orchids, new species, get their names. So the traditional way to describe a new species is you make a type specimen. You measure it, you describe its parts, and you give it a name. So the first species, boom, it's got its name. Now, if a new specimen doesn't conform to the type, you can give it a new name and make a type specimen for this new one. Now, this works well if all members of the same species are identical. But as Frank Cervera will point out, most Phragmipedium species are very variable. So there's a little bit of gray area on these. And then different populations have different genetic variations. And phenotypic plasticity, that's a word for you, due to slight habitat differences, but also during the life of the flower, it can further develop and even change its shape, as this thing will stay on this plant for 2 to 3 weeks. Phenotypic plasticity is a big word for basically what we see. Okay, we know genotype is the genetics behind us. Phenotype is what we see with our eye, how we look, what the flower looks like. So that's the way alpha taxonomy is based on. We see it, we describe it. Well, in a number of these species, they're found in many different countries. So there'll be very different variations in populations, and there have been readily species renamed that, again, the taxonomist said no, some should not be independently named, but that's not for me to decide. Harold Kupowitz said he stayed away from the Phragmipedium taxonomy because there was so much variation within any one species that it was too difficult for him to know where one species started and the other ended. And this is particularly within the Micropedilum section. Several taxonomists have written books, and they're all based on alpha taxonomy. And alpha taxonomy is with the Royal Horticultural Society, and that's what all new species, that's how they do it. The World Checklist of Selected Plant Families is also based on type descriptions, which we can use as judges. To a large extent, these are the opinions of experts and their friends. And taxonomists argue all the time and rename species quite frequently. So there's now something that's called the species concept. And this is based on comparing species in different populations. So in visiting many populations of Phragmipedium, Frank Cervera, for the last 25 years, has gone into every population, studied every species in their native population, as well as Lucille McCook back in 1989, documented the variations in flower color, the shape of its parts, petal twisting, the angle of the floral parts, the size of inflorescence, number of flowers, the leaves, the abundance of hairs, staminode shape, and even differences on flowers of the exact same plant. So they propose separating the species based on the identifying features that do not vary within a population, but that show variation among taxa. He calls this the reality of population dynamics in the field, not alpha taxonomy. There's a great article that Frank Severe proposes this in the October through December 2020 edition, which is the Phragmipedium edition of the Orchid Digest magazine, which is a must-have if you're growing and really interested into Phragmipediums. Well, then Frank took it one step further. I find this the most beneficial thing I've ever found almost on Phragmipediums. Okay, so these are your species. He took all the species, the ones he feels are the different species, and he grouped them into 4 groups based on culture to help us grow them. And he says, be careful how you define terrestrial. That's not growing in a typical potting soil or a potting soil you buy from Home Depot or the ground like the dirt out we have outside. Where these are found, they call them terrestrial, but the soil is actually very porous, very loose and crumbly. You can't squeeze it together, okay? So the first group is what we call warm growing and terrestrial. And a couple of these are even epiphytes growing on a tree, which you'll see here in a minute. The second group is warm growing, terrestrial again, and wet. Group 3, warm growing, lithophytic and humid. These are the ones that grow on the rocks. They're from a riparian habitats, which are in rivers. They're always found in or alongside the boulders of the rivers. And then group 4 are the cool growing and also wet growers. If you note that this one is based on night temperatures and 50 to 55 degrees in their habitat, and again, Frank proposed, he published this in the Phragmipedium issue of Orchid Digest, and this is phenomenal if you want to grow the species. Today I'm gonna focus on the hybrids, but if you want specifics, take a picture of this, screenshot this online. And this helps also when you're looking at what's in the background of your hybrid. You can go back to this and maybe experiment with some different things.
Did you take a picture first?
Sure.
How do I get the volume up more?
That's on.
I can't hear it.
Okay, but watch out. I can't.
Tell me when y'all done taking
Your
pictures.
computer. Well, the volume was down here, but it's not now.
Right.
Okay, we're ready to move along?
Yes.
I could try to get a little closer to the
Okay, go ahead. Thank you.
screen.
Wait, don't go anyplace yet, because I want to get back.
You want to mute that? Oh.
No.
We lost audio.
Up top. It's up top, 'cause I got all right.
Can you hear us now? On Zoom, folks, can you hear us?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
I'll just get a little closer.
Aaron, I think the microphone picked up.
Okay. All right. Got it. Jim, clicker's not working. Not even the advance or back keys.
It's just,
Everybody want a stretch break? No, I better pass on that one.
So how many hairless
While
cats?
we're waiting, I'm gonna be handing out some tickets for door prizes. So don't go away.
I can just say it's over
Yeah.
there.
Okay. Let me, keep this in there.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, folks.
All right, can you still hear us on Zoom?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
All right, wonderful. Let the show continue. All right, so the first species that we're going to talk about is obviously the most dynamic recent discovery, Phragmipedium cavachii. It was found in 2001, elevation 5,200 to 6,400 feet in Peru. This is the largest of the entire genus, and flowers average 6 to 9 inches from the cloud forest. And another great thing is these flowers can last up to 21 days, whereas the majority of your Phragmipediums are only 2 weeks, if you're lucky. So that's a great trait for Phragmipedium cavachii. The pouch in person is a intense velvety purple. It's unbelievable.
Aaron, excuse me. Ask the Zoom folks if you're seeing the slides.
Are y'all still seeing the slides on Zoom?
Yes, sir, we are.
Great. All right, so here's an in situ picture of where Phragmipedium cavachii grows in the San Martin Valley in Peru. The day temperatures average 79 degrees in the summer, 64 in the winter. The night temperatures 54 to 60. It says they can tolerate 86 degrees. However, the water cascading down these rock faces is always 55 degrees. So that's the important thing for the cavachii. If you look at the picture on the left, that's a side of a hill. It's a valley. You've got airflow moving through there, ice cold or 55-degree water coming down the side of the cliff. And it's misty. And this is the situation where the habitat where cavachii grows. So just keep that in the back of your mind for as we get talk about the hybrids later on. And obviously, especially when if you want to try growing this. Here's another picture of it in the San Miguel district. It grows in approximately 1 inch of porous rocky soil that has an alkaline pH and low electrical conductivity. You see, this is what we call the cloud forest. This is a hybrid I got awarded, the cavachii hybrid, an example of a good awarded one of cavachii. And then here's one I got awarded earlier this year on a cross that actually I made with the parents of this one. Now, the Eric Young Orchid Foundation took me a lot longer to get it to bloom. And once I did, I found out that the Eric Young Foundation had already done this cross and named it, because that would have been a great one. I would have named that after one of my daughters or something. But anyway, I got to pick. Not many survived, but that was the finest of what I got. Here's an example. It didn't quite make it. This is a Cavacii hybrid. This is a Fritz Schomburg, which I'll talk about later. You can kind of see the size in relation to some of the other ones. This is one that fell off about 4 days ago, and I've been floating it in water just so it'll last to bring it in here. It's still in bud, it just didn't have a, and I'll show it to those online. Okay. So the next section is the micropedilums, which are characterized by rather wide petals that are longer but similar in color and shape to the dorsal. So if you look at the petals and the dorsals, they're pretty much the same shape, and that's how they classify everything into this section. They're not elongated like a tape, okay? Here are the 7 species. They've now lumped Dallasandroi into a variation of Besseyi. And that takes us into the biggie, Phragmipedium Besseyi. So you can see it's got different populations in Ecuador and Peru, elevation 3,600 to 4,200 feet. It's an intermediate grower, so it is possible to grow these. The most intense color of the genus. It's the flattest and best formed Phragmipedium. It comes in several color forms, red, orange, and flavum. Now, these 3 are all in my collection, still growing them. I've had these for a long time. The 2 red ones are awarded clones. The one on the left is actually an FCC clone, and the one in the middle is your flavum or your yellow form. It's interesting to note there has only ever been one yellow Besseyi ever found. They've never found another one. It was sent to the Eric Young Orchid Foundation, where they've just basically self-pollinated and self-pollinated. So every yellow Besseyi descends from one parent. So there's a lot of inbreeding, and these are probably the most difficult for me to grow. This particular one is still growing, but I have lost a couple, and I find these very difficult just because it's all inbreeding. There's very little outbreeding. Another great thing about it is genes are dominant in breeding, and nice flat petals, and it also imports this coloring. Now, variation or Phragmipedium Dallasandroi, which is now considered a variation of Besseyi. As you can see, the petals are more narrow and they're drooping. I always find that they're kind of rolled at the base, and then they're also a little more orange in color. They have more compact growth and a short rhizome, and they clump. And this is one of the ones that branch, and they pass that on to its progeny, making for a potential wonderful display. When we're judging orchids, if we see that something is, we'll see that Dallasandroi is in the background, and then we'll see an orchid whiz. Okay, well now it's a Besseyi. Well, you can't expect the offspring to be exactly like a Besseyi. We have to take into account that the Dallasandroi was in the background of this plant. Here's the in situ picture of Besseyi or Dallasandroi. The plants grow close to a cascade of water that's pouring down the rock face. You see the one here on the right just growing on bare rock, but it's always moist. There's always water coming down. They also grow in the sprays off of waterfalls. And how many people have ever been to a waterfall in person? So one thing you'll notice is it's always cool, moving air. Well, that's what we're dealing with. That's where these plants are found with Cavacii and Besseyi. They're from a cooler area, an intermediate area, and that's the climate that you would want to, or where they're found. A nice population on both pictures here. So here's a Besseyi hybrid that I've gotten awarded. This is a high level, a lot of Besseyi in its background. And here's another Besseyi hybrid crossed with a small, tiny, compact pink flower. This is a very intense color for the cross. The majority are actually a Barber Leanne's or a two-tone flower, which gives a two-tone offspring. Now, this is one of my awarded ones that was made with a Besseyi flavum. So you see we got two-tone red the pinkish, and yellow. This is ultra rare in Phragmipediums, the two-tone ones, but that's a good example of one. Here today, I have, this is Cahaba Fire. This one is, you can look at these after, but this is got a lot of Bessii. So you can see that it's got flat petals, intense red coloring here. And I have another one, but I'll hold that one for just a minute. So the next one, an important species in this section is Schlimmii. Okay, so Schlimmii is a small plant in a small little flower. It's important to us in pink breeding. It branches, okay, just like Delisandroi, and it imparts warmth tolerance. And the coolest thing of all, out of all the species, this one is fragrant at different times of the day. And its F1 hybrids can be fragrant. In this picture, Schlimmii is on the one on the left. We have Manzurii, which is now considered a form of Schlimmii. This is Andrette on the bottom left, and Fischeri on the bottom right.
Eron, is that the one that that Wendy Hill sent to us over here with a little flower on it?
It's got Schlimmii in the background. That's why she sent some of these,
Okay.
because it's good for warmth
Those are cute.
tolerance. They are. They're charming little flowers. They're small, perfect for windowsill growth. Now here's some Schlimmii or Manzurii growing in situ. As you can see, this population here is growing on a sheer vertical cliff, but there's enough moss that it catches the seeds, and you see seedlings in that middle picture. In this section, Micropedilum, this is basically the pouches of several closely related ones cut in half, and the fundamental differences to distinguish each other are the fenestrations in the pouch, which are the little windows that you see here on Schlimmii and Anguloi. They're almost little clear little pouches you can see in through the side, whereas Manzurii and Andrette do not have those
When you say windows, you don't mean
fenestrations.
openings. Yeah.
No, it's a little film,
Okay.
but it's clear. There's no color
Right,
there.
gotcha.
And now here is a Schlimmii hybrid. Now this is also crossed with Eric Young, which has got a lot of Bessii in it, so it gave it a bigger size. But as you can see, it's dominant. It's got a lot of pink in it. Now this is another Schlimmii hybrid I've got awarded. This is a primary between Andrette and Schlimmii. This is a tiny little plant, small little flower, but an excellent example of the hybrid. All right, so this takes us into the next section, which is Phragmipedium, section Phragmipedium. And these has had the most confusion, and as they've been named and renamed numerous times. For those of us online, you can find these named as 2 or 3 different names for sale on the internet for the same plant. Depends on which taxonomist honors which name. The species in this section are characterized by their long, pendulous petals. All right, so here's Phragmipedium caudatum. Caudatum is Latin for the term long petal, which now the whole section are called the longtails. And these petals will grow over a week to week and a half time frame, just like Sanderianum will. So you want to put it where those petals can just keep hanging and keep growing. And these are all 3 of mine there. Now, for historical purposes, I thought this was interesting, and I decided to put it in the presentation. This is the holotype of what was first described as a Cypripedium caudatum. So we talked about this alpha taxonomy. They get a type specimen. This one here in the top right was the flowers that were sent to the Royal Horticultural Society and described, and that's what caudatum was described on. You read the big botanical description, these are the original flowers, and these are always stored indefinitely. Andrew Matthews found it in Peru in 1832 among specimens of an herbarium that he's supposed to belong to the discoverers Ruiz and Pavon. Now, also in this section, here's an example of a couple of them, Papovii or Humboldtii or Wierswichianum, growing as an epiphyte. Okay, And also a newer one called Guyanensis grows as an epiphyte as well. So when we're growing these, and even with their offspring, we got to remember that because they're going to need more air to the roots, but we'll talk about that in a minute. But it's really cool growing in the trees for Phragmipedium. Rains every day. So here's a couple of the long-tailed hybrids that I've gotten awarded. The one on the left is obviously dominated by multiple long tails in its background. Well, actually, this one is the primary between longifolium and Humboldtii, which is similar to Grande, whereas Grande was made with caudatum in longifolium. And most people, especially the judges, are familiar with Grande. And then the one on the right was a Bessii hybrid made with one of the long tail species, and it does shorten up the petals. I have one here today that's in bloom. This is one made. This is one made with one of the long tails. This is China Dragon. As you can see, one of the parents was a Bessii hybrid, and the other was a long tail. So that's kind of what you can expect for hybrids made in the long tails.
Would this be a typical bloom season, or are these?
So that's a good question, because normally I would have, this is actually the worst season for Phragmipediums. When you asked me to do this presentation, the first thing I said is December is probably, November, December is some of the worst months for Phragmipediums, especially for me. And the reason is I grow a lot of Bessii hybrids. So what ends up happening is they hit the summer, the temperatures at night, the temperatures during the day are warmer than this plant is used to or supposed to have. They stop growing. They don't stop growing, but they slow their growth. And then by the time the fall comes around, our days get shorter. And then my greenhouse gets down to about 55 degrees, which is cooler than all these are found, except for Bessii. And it's just, you're coming out of the summer is the problem. In the spring, all my Bessii are in bloom, all those Bessii hybrids. And that goes into June and even July before the temperatures, as long as the buds are developed in the cooler temperatures, you'll have nice climate or nice flowers. Now, this section is some of the most important for our warmth species hybrids. And its most distinguishing, well, basically it's characterized by shorter tape-like petals. We know the micropedilums have wide petals. Then the Phragmipedium section has the very long petals. This one are short tape-like. The most distinguishing characteristic, though, is they have two protuberances on both sides of the aperture of the pouch, which we call the horns. The aperture is the side of the pouch. Here's a close-up of longifolium, and you can see inside the circle there the little horns. And in its offspring, you'll see these pop up, and that's part of this. How we know it's from this particular section. This species is the easiest to grow. I have a number of them for sale over there that I brought that have been in my greenhouse for a number of years from a cross that I made of two awarded there. Now, talking more about longifolium, if we look, the day temperature is 88, night is 63. So now we're looking at more along our lines, closer to our climate as far as the day temperatures go. Nights are still a little cooler, but look at the range. I mean, this is the most diverse and hardy species because look where this thing can be found. You know, and it's found right on the coast. Some of them take much warmer temperatures. So it's the most diverse variable in both plant size and flower size. It's easy to bloom, the most hardy for our climate, and its flowers are produced over a long period of time. So here I have two different longifolium species. There's probably about 8 or 9 variations of the species. For our door prize today, I have a couple different variations. This one is the variation Hartwegii. As you can see, I cut one spike off, but it grows readily. Now, this one is an awarded longifolium. And that's what basically you're looking at. Now, this was my first ever award, and this is a longifolium hybrid, which you can expect from that. I actually have a division of this for sale over there, an awarded division of mine. And this was Inca Embers. I also got one awarded last weekend, which is another very high level longifolium hybrid here. So this is what longifolium does to our, when we use it in hybridizing, is it not only gives you a pretty little ruffle to the petals, but it slenders them out. And there's numerous longifolium hybrids because they're the hardiest. So Phragmipedium piercii habitat, and I did this section, grown in Peru. Like we said, they're from a riparian habitat. So they're found on boulders, in the rivers. I actually have a Phragmipedium species in bloom.
Hey, could you all take that background off of that video so that we can see what you're showing, Erin?
I'm afraid that for them to mess with it right now while we got all this working.
Yeah, because we can't
I'll hold
see
it in front
anything.
of me. Does that help?
Yes, that will
Yeah,
help.
I can do that. Let me just hold it in front of me. So here's a piercii species. If you notice the size of the plant, okay, so when we talk about compacts, piercii is very important. Actually, this is the variation equidurens, which is a small diminutive form of the species. I also have another species in bloom from this section. This is Caricinum. This is actually not a very great spike of it. Spike should be above foliage, but it was in bloom nonetheless, so I brought it. And that's an example. And you're welcome to come look at these on our break and see these up close and touch and feel or whatever you want to do. All right, so here's another species that I got awarded. This is Phragmipedium richterii. Again, if you notice the petals, when you're breeding with these, you're going to have twisty petals, wavy petals, and that's a really nice richterii. So now we move into where are we going? Where's our breeding going? What are different hybrids? So if you look at this, we've got, I mean, all these different colors, whites, yellows, pinks, intense reds, long petals, short, long, dangly petals. And also we have size and little flowers. Really, there's everything you would want to suit everyone's taste. This chart shows the number of Phragmipediums hybrids registered in each year. We see about an 80-year gap here where there was nothing registered. And pretty much that was because all you had was brown and green flowers. They did a little dabbling with it, with caudatum and such. There was Schlemii that was found, but it just was kind of not boring, but there just wasn't enough interest when all these big cattleyas are coming out of South America. Then, 1981, Phragmipedium besseyi was discovered. And as you can see, once that became available here in the US and in England, look at all the hybrids, they start shooting up now. And now we have color in Phragmipediums. And then it's dominant in the color. Well, then Cavachii was found in 2000. And it's now we got size. And we can also get some purples. But we didn't have size until Cavachii was found. And that leads us into Cavachii influenced hybrids. The biggest thing is it imparts size. Besseyi, when crossed with it, imparts great shape and form. So if you use besseyi hybrids that have high-level besseyi in them with flat, broad petals and cross it with Cavachii, you're going to get, these are all awarded pictures from Orchid Wiz. The middle one is mine. This is the one on the bottom right is Phragmipedium Frank Smith, which was made with Cavachii and one of the long petals. The next breeding are the rounder and flatter using besseyi, Schlemii, and Fisheri. These are your smaller flowers, kind of like you see here. I mean, you can, you talk 12 centimeters across, so they're not too small, but anywhere they could be smaller. But they're more the rounded, flatter, what we like to see as judges, right? Back crossing this to besseyi come out in a dark red, even more intense than besseyi itself. We all know Phragmipedium Jason Fisher, intense. And by the way, that's one of the most difficult hybrids to grow, is Jason Fisher and Scarlet O'Hara, which keep back crossing back and back and back to Bessie. So if you've tried a Jason Fisher, H.P. Norton said that was the most difficult hybrid for him to grow. So just keep that in the back of your mind. No big deal if you've killed it. You can expect to do that. All right, so here's the best Cavacii hybrid to date. It's actually the one that I have here floating in water. This is Fritz Schomburg, and that was the primary from crossing Cavacii to Bessie. And here are different color examples. If we crossed it to a yellow Bessie, you get a very pale, light pink color. It's the only way to get a light pink, cotton candy kind of color. And then you can see the other different colors that come out of a cross. The majority are going to be in your salmon colored. They average about 5 to 7 inches. And we can also get your large yellows by taking the one that was made with the yellow flavum, Bessie, and back cross that back to Bessie, because it's carrying the recessive yellow gene. And now you bloom out enough of them, some will turn out yellow, and those are extremely rare in the Phragmipedium community. Now we have the hybrids with somewhat narrower and somewhat downswept petals. These are made with Longifolium, Piercii, Lindleyanum. So if a primary crossed with these here, Longifolium and Piercii, this is what you can see. If you go with that crossed to pinks, you stay pink. If you go with reds, you have reds. This one at the bottom right is obviously predominantly Longifolium. Now here's Longifolium influence in breeding. You take a Bessie, you cross it with a Longifolium, and that gave us Phragmipedium Eric Young. Notice the slim petals, but the good thing is Longifolium is not dominant in color, thankfully, okay? But it does give us vigor in the offspring. And then you take Andean Fire, which was made with like a Bessie and Sargentianum, cross it with Longifolium, and that gives us Inca Embers, which is my awarded one down here at the bottom right. Now here's Longifolium influence with whites and pinks. You take Schlimmii, crossed it with Longifolium, and we got Syndenii, a real pretty little pink white flower. Then you can take it, back cross it to Longifolium again, and you get Phragmipedium colorum. I actually have a colorum in bud right now, but it hasn't opened in time for me to bring it today, or I would have one in this type of breeding trend. These are the ones made with the long tails. We call them the long tail hybrids. The top left, if you stick with just long tail species to long tails, they stay long. Or you can see how the ones here in the second one here on the bottom left, for those of you online, that was probably made with an Eric Young back to a long petal. Notice because it had Bessie, it still keeps some of its red color. This is one of my awarded ones. This is made with a long tail and straight Cavacii. It gives us a nice pretty color. The spotting is really cool inside the lip there. And then we come to the more compacts, the smaller ones, kind of like these, the colorum and the Piercii. These are smaller flowers, great for windowsill growing if you don't have much room. They're made with the smaller species, such as Schlimmii, Fisheri, Andrette, Ecuadorens, Piercii, etc. Even Longifolium has a miniature a variation, a more diminutive form. Now we have an example of, on the picture on the left, we have some compact Phragmipediums in the front and your standard ones here in the back, and you can see standard ones and some compacts here as well. Now, on the one on the right, this picture, this is the exact same cross, Eric Young, okay, crossed with Bessie and Longifolium. However, the one on the right was crossed with a standard Longifolium. The one on the left was used in the small plant form, which is the Gracili variety. So look at the difference in your plant size. Same flower, look to it, just more compact plant. And that one I got here on the left, that came from Earl Bailey at Orchid Babies. Here are a couple compact small Phragmipediums I've gotten awarded from a cross of Andrette by Piercii. Again, Pierceai's got very twisty little petals. Even Andrette is rolled. Gives us these really cool look on our petals here. And it keeps both of those flowers. Andrette is a pink in the Pierceai section, and it kept the pink color. This is one of the ones that I made, a hybrid that I made using Jason Fisher, and crossed it back to Andrette. When I made this cross, I was collaborating with somebody in Colombia, a friend of mine, and there was only one Andrette hybrid made at the time. So anyway, I decided to cross mine to Jason Fisher, and then this became the result. And this will take us into, this will be the last slide before we take a quick little break. And this will take us into the next presentation, which is how we're going to grow. So you need to consider species or hybrids. With the hybrids, you get hybrid vigor. We've all heard of that. They're much more hardy and easier to grow. And they also have much more warmth tolerance than your species itself, with the exception of longifolium. They will do great for you. And I have those priced really cheap over there. Intent to everybody to give them a shot. Now, your species will have special requirements that if you want to grow some of the species besides longifolium or Pierceai, you're going to have to do more, and you figure out you're going to have to change a few things and kind of tweak it to each species. If you are a species grower, you already know this, especially with the cattleyas. We've got a lot of cattleya species, and there are things we do differently, things that they can't take that your hybrids can. So for our area, I recommend starting with hybrids that have at least one of the warm growing species in the background, such as longifolium, Schlemmii, Andrette, and Pierceai. And with that, that'll end on this. I want to show you real quick. We have, so these are the two main books that have been written on Phragmipediums. We have, this one's called Slipper Orchids of the Tropical Americas. This was by Philip Cribb and Christopher Perver of the Royal Horticultural Society. This is a recent book published in 2017. This one is called the genus Phragmipedium. This is the most recent published one by Dr. Guido Grimm himself, who I cited on there for using his chart. These are a must-have if you're really interested in Phragmipediums and for judging. This is the Orchid Digest edition, the Phragmipedium edition that came out in October, November, December. I mean, this is like a Bible in itself here, and it goes into each species and a little more, but also it has Frank Cervera's proposal of the species concept and that slide I showed you with the species and how he lumped them into those 4 growing ones. So I highly recommend Orchid Digest. Then we have the Slipper Orchid Alliance, which is this basically, you'll see a lot on mainly paps and frags, but they do put stuff on your Cypripediums as well. This particular edition has something by Marilyn Ledoux, who is kind of one of my go-to people for if I'm looking to buy new Phragmipediums. We have plants for sale that came from Marilyn Ledoux over there. She's got some of the healthiest plants I have, the best prices if you're interested in buying some online. And I've always gotten great plants from her, and she's got several of my crosses that I've given her flasks, and we've traded for flasks of some of my crosses that she sells from time to time. So,
Eron, one of the online questions was, did you have an online sale platform? So the answer is
no. These are just, I don't sell them. I just collect them. But I made a longifolium cross, and I knew that would be good for beginners. And not just beginners, but if you just want to try a species. So that's just from a cross with an awarded parent that I had made. And I had a bunch of them compotted, and I said, this would be a great thing just to get them in people's hands to give them a try. Other than growing, which we'll talk about later, are there any questions on what I've covered so far? Any other online questions?
that was the only one. So
Okay, so we'll take, where's Frank at?
just take a couple of minutes.
Like 5 minutes or so, stretch, and yeah, and then we'll Yeah, the raffle ticket, I bought a couple plants that I've donated for the raffle, as well as another product.
Try to get to that line. I'm gonna change that background because I had my personal, and so I needed to.
Go back one slide, please.
What's that?
Can you go back one slide? There you go.
Okay, do I need to be involved with you at all at this point?
Jim, would you consider taking that background out?
Good to see you.
No, I just got here. I tried to zoom into the first one. My mom was in the hospital, so I had to run back to slide out and ran back up here.
And then you can ride with me and bring back.
Okay, I'll talk to you in a second. Yeah.
That's great, Jim.
That is wonderful.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. We just, a lot of last minute things.
That's okay.
Hey, normally it's a lot of fun.
Oh, Jim, you accidentally clicked blur. You accidentally clicked the blur background rather than the normal background on your way
Got
out.
it blurred. I selected blur. Is that not showing blurred?
It is. I just thought it might be easier to not have it blurred so that we could see his plants when he's showing them.
Blur, he's saying, is just going
Oh,
to.
okay.
Take the blur out.
It's out of his field of view. It's going to blur it.
Okay,
So he may just.
so we'll go there. How's that?
Yeah, that's it.
Great, thank you.
So can you guys see this
Yes,
Yes.
yep,
better now?
yes, much better.
All right, sorry about that. Hey, Mal.
No
I
problem.
thought the blur was my cataracts.
I know. Yeah.
I know. You know, you're supposed to go about there's nothing about it. No. That one.
He's in Fort Hill, so.
Oh, really? I'll do on that.
I'll over it soon.
Yeah.
I don't know what's gonna happen once he's, he's got.
Oh, my God. Nice talk.
Thank you.
Yeah, you did.
Appreciate it.
No, that's good.
Not too boring.
No.
Yeah.
You guys want better light on that? I can turn the front lights on.
I'm gonna move those lights. I'm gonna move it back.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, back to. Thank you.
I'm looking for something with that color. That is just beautiful.
Now, Maryland has some of these for sale, but I didn't get a lot of those. We didn't get. I didn't bring it. No, these are just my personal plans. But there may be something over there that's got. It's outside, it's really, these are old flowers. This one's probably. This one is-
If you turn that around, it mimics the statue. It's really wild. I love the shadow on the wall.
Yeah.
You gotta admit, that's a pretty flower.
That's a pretty flower.
Pollination for the next topic. No, I don't. But hopefully what you learn. Yeah, I used to be a right. I've always been interested
I do have some green. And I love that. And I do like the micro.
But I'm a big species grower. Well, I never really, while I was working, then when I didn't get a chance
Okay, anybody that's not got the red ticket, anybody that's not got the
Road,
blue
road
red
tag,
see Mr.
April, February. I've had it for the last 12 months.
Maybe let somebody else go away.
Go ahead, no problem. Pretty cool.
All right, if everybody's had a chance to kind of stretch their legs and drive green, appreciate it. We can make some movement back towards our seats as we try to get the show going. If you didn't get a blue raffle ticket, either come see this time or raise your hand. Okay, have somebody else come home with your plans. back here all day.
How is that screen to read? Should these lights be turned off or is the screen okay?
I can read it. All right, I'm going to get started. Folks in the back, I think that'll be fine. But we need to go ahead and start. Verify that the can still see you.
It's not advancing. Can y'all still see me on Zoom and hear me okay?
We sure can.
Good. It's locked up. Yeah.
Next to the last call. Try that. Bingo.
All right, are we, everybody ready to get started on the culture part of it?
Yeah.
Okay, looks like we lost all of our judges, but I guess you guys get to be the better growers then, right? All right, can we kill this light right here?
Yeah.
All right. Better? Yep, better. Okay. So there are many of us succeeding growing Phragmipediums in the South, so you can do it. And I mean that. When I was living in Houston, the first person I saw that had Phragmipediums was Denny Haas, for you guys in Houston. He grew his outside in an open greenhouse in a tray of water. And when it rained outside, it got rained on. When it was 100 degrees outside, they got 100 degrees other than the shade cloth he had over his open air greenhouse. Rick Hepler, also in south of Houston, he is a friend of mine who grows a lot of Phragmipediums. And then Phyllis and Earl Bailey, which were formerly Orchid babies in Alabama, H.P. Norton in South Carolina. So anyway, there's friends I have in Florida that are growing them. They definitely can be grown here. So there are some things you have to do to grow them well. And that's what I'm going to talk about. I went through all my literature and stuff that I've used and applied in my own growing. And that's what I'm going to spill it all out here for you today. So culture considerations is understanding the natural environment, hybrids of species, temperature, light, air movement, water, humidity, fertilizing, potting, and media, which we'll all talk about this today. The goal is to get all of these things right. So the only major stress we have is temperature. Okay, we don't want these plants to be stressed in every facet. We want to get everything else right. So we have to focus. So the only main stress is the temperature, which we can't do a whole lot about. Little caveat is there's no one size fits all, as there are many variables in the needs of the plants, the individual growing conditions, and each person's willingness to dedicate the time and effort to growing them. They can't all be grown the same. The example would be if you want to grow the long tails versus Phragmipedium besseyi. There's little things you're going to have to do for the species, and depending on the hybrids. But the hybrids are very forgiving. You can definitely grow them. Give them a try. We have some really cheap ones over there that are great quality plants, and you'll never find another one at that price on the Phragmipediums. Know that whenever you make a change, it's going to ultimately affect every other aspect of growing. So you move something into a brighter spot, it's going to affect the temperature of that plant. The air movement may be affected. There's all different, but when you make a change, you start watering every day, something else is going to happen. So you need to keep that into mind. So if I had to summarize on one slide, okay, how do we grow frags? So you want good air movement. Okay, this is a must. You've got to have air movement on the plants. High humidity doesn't have to be very high unless you're doing species. Bright but diffused light. Good water quality. More frequently you water, the better. Okay, remember that. The more you water, the better they're going to do. Open in a fresh potting mix that stays moist but doesn't suffocate the roots. So we talked about hybrid. Yeah, take a picture of this one, screenshot it. But I'm going to go into this more in depth, okay? So you'll hear all of this again. All right. So we've all heard of the term hybrid vigor. Everybody throws this out there. Well, there's a formal term for this, and that's called heterosis. And this is a phenomenon in which hybrids form between individuals of closely related species, as in the Phragmipedium genus, are more robust and vigorous than their parents. And Charles Darwin was the first scientist to study this in a scientific manner. Now, this is the opposite of inbreeding, keeping with the species. Now we're breeding out to different species or different hybrids. And such vigor is in the rapidity of how rapid they grow, more warmth tolerance, robustness, overall hardiness, greater biomass, larger, more frequent, longer lasting blooms, and they can survive a little neglect, less optimum conditions. So all those over there are great for our environment. Somebody did ask about Marilyn Ledoux. I mentioned her. She's from Windy Hill Gardens. So if you Google Windy Hill Gardens, she's a judge in St. Louis, and that's her business. And she's a wonderful lady. All right, so the first thing we have to do is understand the natural environment. And that's key to growing them well. And that applies to all orchids. And if you're a species grower, this is an absolute must. You got to know how this thing grows. And I've shown you today a lot of the in situ pictures of where all those species grow, okay? So to be a great grower, you've got to figure out how to manipulate their needs from nature and create an artificial environment in which that can happen. So this picture, this was our Phragmipedium picture in the valley. This is a cloud forest picture here. Obviously in the mountains, in the valley, you've always got a breeze blowing through there. We know the water is coming down this rock face. There's lots of mosses growing on there. This is not stale, stagnant air, like where I grew up here in the swamp, okay? It's not in a muddy bog. And it's not in some hot, dry field getting baked on, okay? So the plant itself provides clues to its expectations. It's got a monopodial growth habit, which means it has only leaves and roots, no pseudobulbs. That has very little water storage in comparison to a pseudobulb. It must have consistent and irregular supply of moisture. Okay, that's like a foot stomper when it comes to if you're in class. It must have a constant supply of water. And then in the wild, high humidity also hydrates the plants. So that takes us into watering. They absolutely need their roots to stay moist at all times. The biggest challenge to growing Phragmipediums is how to keep the roots moist without rotting the plants, okay? No species, this is what Frank Cervera observed when he studies them, no species are grown in standing water in their natural population. Now, a lot of us can grow in a tray of water. I mentioned my friend Denny Haas has them outside in a tray of water. I have them some in saucers of water, but no species grow in standing water, okay? They're not in a stagnant water. Clean, pure water is absolutely essential, especially if you're going to grow the species. And another purpose of clean, pure water is it flushes out salts that accumulate in the media over time. So I'm going to throw 3 critical questions, and I call them critical questions because you really need to know the answer to these next 3 questions if you really want to take growing to the next level, okay? And do really well with Phragmipediums, especially if you want to push the limit on growing stuff that you really shouldn't grow. I've got Draculas, I've got Masdevallias, I've got Zygopedilums and Noctoniopsis, and I'm growing them in the same greenhouse as all my Cattleyas and my Bantas, okay? So, and 60 different genera in the same greenhouse, about 1,000 orchids. All right, so the questions are, what is the TDS, or total dissolved solids, or electrical conductivity of your water? Okay, that's the first question. Do you have the answer to that one?
Yes.
The next one is, what is the pH of your water? And finally, how many parts per million sodium is in your water? Okay, you really have to know this if to see what we see. Water as just some clear thing that hydrates us and hydrates our plants, but it's full of minerals in water and bad stuff, okay? You must know your water quality from a water test. At the least, know your total dissolved solids. You can buy, here's what a simple at-home TDS meter. You just go on eBay or whatever, internet, and then type in a TDS meter. You can get them for like $20, $30. You stick it in the water and it's gonna spit out how many total dissolved solids you have, which we'll talk about. So water must be low in soluble salts. The salts and minerals in your water can be measured as electrical conductivity or total dissolved solids. Hard water staining is an early warning that your water contains excessive salts. Excessive salts cause root tip burn, leaf tip burn, or even complete death to the root. Sodium can be very toxic. So ideally you want less than 10 parts per million sodium. Levels above 50 parts per million are considered very harmful, as well as excessive levels of chlorine, chloride, and boron can be harmful as well. Here's a chart from a Sue Baton article published in the Orchids magazine, February 2017. If you're a member of the American Orchid Society, you can access all these magazines online. And same with the Slipper Orchid Alliance. You've got internet access to all these. So as you can see, what she says is excellent quality is our total dissolved solids of 175 or less. Good quality, 175 to 525. And I'm going to say with Phragmipediums, especially if you're pushing the limits on growing other things, is I find these numbers to be high. Okay, I think it's more, it should be, I would classify them as less than the numbers you see here. 500 before you add fertilizer is going to be toxic eventually. So I would say that, you know, if you can get 175 or less, you're doing good to start with on your water. You can make up for poor water quality to some degree by keeping the plants more wet. Okay, water quality becomes a worse issue as you dry a plant out. The wetter you grow, the more forgiving the plants will be of water quality, and that's because as the water evaporates, your moisture, your salts concentrate into those little crystals like you can see on the top of your media, and that's death to Cattleya root or any root. So if you do have higher water TDS in your water, keep it more wet and you're flushing that stuff out, even though it's being replaced. you'll still be able to grow these. I thought this was an interesting, so Ray Barkaloo from First Raise Orchids, and I'll talk about a product, an additive booster that I use. And he's a chemist, and he's got a wonderful resource. If you Google First Raise, he's got a great resource section. And he says that water is to a plant as air is to a car engine. Well, for those of us that know a lot about the cars, when you step on the accelerator, you're allowing more air into the engine, which is drawing in more fuel or allowing more fuel to be injected into that engine, giving you more power, more speed. Okay, well, that's what water does to our plants. Now, this is, I'm going to summarize, not read all this verbatim. This is great. For those of us that are very technical and science savvy, I love this right here, and that's why I chose to put it in the presentation. But in summary, basically, you have the water in the root zone. It's moved up through the xylem up into the plant. And then photosynthesis, water is broken down to hydrogen and oxygen. Basically, if different enzymes bind to the carbon, you get carbon fixation, plants grow. Okay. If you don't have enough, then no carbon assimilated energy is lost and no growth occurs. And that's where water supply to our roots is important. You want it to be substantial. It signals to the plant, hey, I can open my stomata, I can breathe through respiration. It expels oxygen, takes in carbon dioxide. You got moisture coming up, allowing this plant to really do it. Transpirational pull is the term given to, as the evaporation happens, that's where what's called the moisture makes its way up through into the leaves of the plant and then evaporates out through respiration. If your water supply is insufficient, that signal's not sent. The stomata stays closed, less carbons are fixed, and growth is reduced. Simple as that. Okay. We want a media that's got open, airy mix. So even if you just water that thing multiple times a day, there's no fear of suffocation because it's airy. And basically, you can be generous with your watering, opening up the throttle on growth.
Eron, I listened to a talk by Bill Toms, and he was saying that that water is where people's flowers are not opening properly. He said a lot of times that can be caused, that's usually a water problem, because, which is exactly what you're saying. Correct. He said that if you think about a tulip, the flower is fully formed in the bottom of that tulip. And so all you have to do is just give it enough water to open. He says a lot of people, when they have an orchid, are not given enough water, and that's why the flowers aren't full. Yep. So it's actually what you're saying too.
All right, so continuing on, we'll talk about that in a minute. All right, so continuing on, the watering frequency ultimately will depend on your growing media and your air movement. The denser you make your media, the less you have to water. You want to water the same way year round. So this is my biggest challenge to growing Phragmipediums and other water-loving plants is I'm going 4 days a week. I can't water every day, okay? Ideally, if you could water it every day, that's with an open mix, then that's great. The caudatums and your longtails, they cannot have a lot of media. They have to have a lot of air in the media. So this is the biggest challenge for me is I have to make it a little more dense, which causes some other potential issues that I've figured out how to make it work for me. And hopefully you can take home some points from this presentation to help you become a better grower. And there's more than, I mean, the way I grow it may be a little bit different than each different person that grows it. I mentioned Denny Haas grows it outside, okay? Mine's in a closed-in greenhouse. So if the plants dry out, they become extremely stressed, they stop growing, and then go through a sulking period, and then become susceptible to rots and other diseases. Hey, if they dry out one time, okay, it's not a big deal, but you cannot make a habit of that, and you really just don't want it to happen. After repotting, I tend to keep them a little on the drier side, just till those roots heal. If your leaf tips start turning brown, then lack of enough water is usually the culprit, and you've probably let it get too dry. Avoid spraying water on the plants from overhead. Water from the base of the plant. I know this is a pain. Believe me, I've got 1,000 plants that I water at the base of the plants, okay? But avoid spraying water from overhead. So here's an example on the right. So that's me watering this particular plant right on the media. You don't want to do what's on the left, is just shower this plant from on top. If you're growing outside, okay, it's a natural evaporation, natural environment. It's fine if it gets rained on. Obviously, they get rained on in the wild, but in a cooped up greenhouse, you do not want to water, if at all possible, from on the top. Now, do my plants get wet? Absolutely, okay, but it's incidental. I don't just hose my plants down. I'm always going to get splatter. When I'm watering my vandas, water is going to splash on them. But we'll talk about air circulation is what will help this. But just start from the get-go, watering them from the base of the plant so you don't have to hope for all the other things. Ideally, you want to pot in an open mix. You water heavily and often. Every time you water, you move air through the pot and across those roots. You go back to that Ray Barkaloo slide on transpiration and respiration. The more you water, you open up the throttle on plant growth. The long petal species especially need lots of air to the roots as they typically grow more exposed in a much, some of them, like I mentioned, grow as epiphytes in the trees. And then the others all grow in a very loose, rocky mix with just a little bit of leaf litter to keep that moisture and some mosses. Water doesn't directly cause root rot, okay? Orchids do much of their gas exchange through their roots. The challenge is providing enough water while allowing plenty of air to the roots. And this is profound. The issue isn't really overwatering as it is under-airing. I mean, you think about that. I mean, that's powerful. And it really is what we're talking about. It doesn't matter whether you have a Cattleya, a Phalaenopsis, or a Phragmipedium, air to the roots. Okay, that's is what helps. And what I do is, even during the winter, I use reverse osmosis water, which we'll talk about in a second. I'll add a heater to my tanks and heat it to 70 degrees. That way in the winter, I don't have a cold shock that I would have out of water out of a hose. I can't use my tap water to start with, but so my reverse osmosis fills up these drums. And then also stick an aerator in there, which I read at some point over the years in the Orchid magazine, and that aerates that water, and that water is just bubbling and flows, vibrant like a river, like a waterfall. Now, humidity is water vapor in the air, not water on the leaves, okay? It's different. Avoid watering the leaves and spraying the whole plant, like we mentioned. Airflow will help us dry out the foliage. Water on the leaves doesn't evaporate readily, and orchids are poor at foliar absorption of water, and pockets of water make great little incubators for bacteria and fungi. They prefer 60 to 85% humidity, but they can tolerate as lower as long as the roots stay moist. The hybrids can take as low as 30, 35% humidity, which is easily within our reach, but the root humidity must always be very high. So we're talking about watering and keeping those roots moist. Have I said that enough today?
Aaron, I have a question. What's the difference between that and a Phragmipedium? Is that a whole other talk?
Yeah,
Okay.
paths, they can dry out a little bit.
Okay.
But it won't hurt. I mean, if pot a path into an open mix, and you can still water it frequently.
But if you already know how to grow paths, and
More water for fragments.
more water, okay.
More moist.
Okay.
All right, so in the South, I'm just throwing this out there. It's nothing we can really do anything about. But in the deep South here, one cultural issue we have is excessive humidity. Okay, every night in the summer, we're at 99% humidity or 100. You know, that's why we have dew all over. If the relative humidity is constantly very high, the rate of evaporation of water from the leaf stomata is stifled, slowing the transpiration process, which ultimately slows the growth of the plant. There's nothing we can really do about this. I mean, I use a wet wall. if I put plants in front of that wet wall at night, well, first, I don't run it at night, but they're all wet. So I'm at 100%, 99% humidity at night. And there's nothing I can do about that. But we just won't have as quick of a growth as the cooler climates that have a little less humidity. The relative humidity, like I said, moderately high, between 60 to 85 degrees for the species, but not saturated if possible. And the hybrids will do much better in that as well, but it's not as critical. Now, moving on to temperature. Why are temperatures important? Well, respiration, burning, cold damage due to freezing. Too cool also promotes the spread of mold and bacteria. And ideally, you want to get a 10 to 15 degree differential between day and night temperatures. We call this diurnal, and that's for optimal growing. One interesting thing is Phragmipediums do not need this temperature drop to bloom, but to grow well, they do like that, but they will bloom without getting a drop.
Doesn't that limit the growth of windowsill if you need that big a differentiation?
It's still going to grow. If you have a look, if I grew on windows for a long time, I have a light stand that's been in my house. A window actually has a really nice, especially a microclimate, because during the day it's going to get warm in that. You're going to see an increase in temperature in that window, and then at night it's going to get cooler. So you're going to have a little fluctuation. 10 degrees? Well, hopefully it's close. Phragmipediums, you don't have to worry about it. They're going to grow, but they'll grow faster if you have this drop, okay? But they're going to grow, so don't stress about this. Now, this is really, really important. Temperature, air movement, and light all go together, and each one influences the other, okay? You can give your frags more light with more air movement or at cooler temperatures. More light gives you more frequent blooming and better quality flowers. They can tolerate temperatures into the upper 90s and even low 200s, but with still air, they're going to burn to a crisp. My greenhouse on the wet wall, when it's first coming out of there during the summer, the hottest part of the day, I'm in around 89 degrees. And as it makes its way through my greenhouse, which is 20 feet long, it's about 96 degrees on my temperature as it's exiting. So I've got frags all along the left side of my greenhouse, even in the corner where it's in the 90s, but they all have air movement, okay? And of course, this is the tip we've heard of before. You feel the leaves when the sun is bright. If the leaves are cool to the touch, perfect. If they feel warm or hot, now you got to be concerned for burning. But increase your airflow, and that's how you solve this problem. Here's the American Orchid Society chart on what they classify cool, intermediate, or warm growers. It's based on these night temperatures here. They say these are the safe estimates. The ranges do overlap. Appropriate night temperatures are critical to good growth and flower. Most orchids do best, like I said, with that diurnal, the 10-15 fluctuation between day and night temperatures. Without this temperature differential, the plant's respiration and metabolism are impacted. If the nights are too warm, the plant spends its energy trying to cool down and respire rather than making the growth. Cool nighttime temperatures allow orchids to store rather than expend the carbohydrates that they manufacture during the day. Night temperatures that are too high or your day-night fluctuations that are insufficient are perhaps the second leading cause of failure to bloom. Who could think probably what is the number one reason a plant won't bloom? No? Light. Okay, we'll talk about that in just a minute too. All right, so on here you can see that if you remember from earlier this morning, Frank Cervera's classification, his culture classification for the species, all but Besseyi and Cavachii are considered warm growers, which is a day 80 to 90 degrees. Now, do we have days 80 to 90 degrees in our summer? So we're definitely hot, but it's okay with air movement. Like I said, my friend in Houston, they're outside. They get whatever the temperature is. The important thing here to understand is look at these night temperatures. Besseyi and Cavachii are here. But look, I've got about 10 Besseis, including the floppum, and they're growing, okay? So they can be grown So what can we do? In the Deep South, if you want to grow the hybrids that have only Besseyi and Cavacii in the background, or ancestry, or a very high percentage, then you will have to have some sort of cooling, such as a wet wall, an evaporative cooler, or an air conditioner to low temperatures. I have a wet wall in the greenhouse. It is not a miracle cooler, okay? But it does its job in the middle of the day during the summer. And it provides humidity, which is another byproduct of it. I already mentioned that during the hottest part of the day, right in front of that wet wall, it's about 88, 89 degrees. And let's see, hybrids using warm and intermediate species or only the warm species can take higher temperatures. And I've grown them successfully with day temperatures hitting in the upper 90s with lots of air circulation in their leaves. There's been one time where the power went out in the middle of the day before I got a home backup generator, and the temperature in my greenhouse hit 118 degrees, okay, for, I don't really know, maybe an hour or hour and a half. I did not lose my Phragmipediums, okay? So a momentary thing is not too concerning. Did they stop growing? I'm sure it did. Did it stress them? Yes, but it won't kill them, okay? But we need to do what we can to lower that temperature. Air circulation will be your friend. Another way to help cool the plants is to use something we call cool pots or clay pots, which I'll talk about here in a minute. You could also move them to the coolest spot in your greenhouse, which is usually down lower, or bring them inside in the air condition during the hot months. I do not bring any of mine inside during the summer, including the Besseyis and Besseyii hybrids. Many people are very successful growing them indoors under lights, and all the big name Phragmipedium hybridizers will say that they're much easier to grow indoors than Paphiopedilums. And then some clones will just be more heat tolerant than others of the same cross. So this is, if you have let's say you want to grow Jason Fisher, for example, okay, or Besseyii. You want to buy from different vendors. You can't buy one plant and expect that plant to just survive. Because the reason is some of these are found at higher elevations, some are found at lower elevations. When you do a cross of offspring, you're going to have some that are going to be warmth tolerant and some that will have no warmth tolerant, and you're not going to know which one it is. So typically I will buy several, and I buy from different vendors. So I get a chance of having something that, like my Sophronitis coccinea or Cattleya coccinea. It took several, but I have some that survived, which I had on our last show here in Baton Rouge. I had a big specimen coccinea plant in our show. So some other things we can do is put misters under your greenhouse benches. So I have misters spraying the pea gravel, and it is cool down low in my greenhouse. And this environment with air circulation helps to keep air a little bit cooler around your plants. I use a Luminet shade cloth, and from their website it says Luminet acts like a mirror as its unique aluminized screens reflect unwanted sunlight and harmful radiation heat from the greenhouse during the summer. You want to elevate the shade cloth so it's not laying flat on the surface of your greenhouse. Don't just drape shade cloth on your greenhouse. All your orchids will benefit from this. You got to get the shade cloth off the surface of your greenhouse to create a little airspace, a little buffer in between the shade cloth and the top of your covering. So this is my greenhouse. As you can see on the top, with that frame I made, it's about a foot tall between the very peak of the greenhouse plastic and where my shade cloth hangs over the top. And then I have this 4-inch PVC along the side. I drape my shade cloth over the top, and then I anchor it down, pull it tight, and there's always there's a foot buffer at the top on down to 4 inches at the side. And that creates, not only is my Luminet reflecting the heat, some of the heat, then what penetrates that shade cloth now has an air buffer between the plastic, so I'm not getting direct penetration of heat into my growing environment. And all your orchids will benefit from that, not just your cooler growers. Here's some examples of heat stress on blooms. This one here on the left is an awarded Besseyi. This was a flower that was a bud that was developed during really warm temperatures. And then also this one at the top right is an awarded flower. But again, heat stress did a toll on that. So that's what with some of the different things you can see. And now we roll into air movement. So this is critical and a key factor here in the South. Remember, we've talked about water, air movement, light, and temperature, okay? Or we haven't talked about light yet, but temperature. Air movement is what's going to help you cool the leaves. All frags are found in areas of higher than normal air movement. All of them. None of them are in still air. They're all in fresh air. It prevents fungal and bacterial infections, and it allows us to grow in brighter conditions. I push the limits on growing very, very bright. And I can do that by everything I've told you so far today. Running water moves air. And we talked about how you feel around a waterfall. You feel a cool breeze blowing, and that's because it's air movement. And then you can take air, and we have air inside the pot and then air outside the pot. Okay, so the air inside the pot, if there's no airflow around those roots, they can't breathe, therefore they suffocate, and root rot is inevitable. As potting media breaks down and decomposes, it compacts around the roots and starts turning into a mushy mud, leaving very little airflow to the roots, which is not what you want. Airflow around the roots is critical. And we've already kind of hit some of this outside the pot airflow. They need good circulation. Very dry air, direct heat, and chills are the enemies of tropical flowers. Circulation helps dissipate the heat on the leaves, fights disease, and use fans, even if you're growing indoors, especially in a window or a corner in your house. Have a little fan, get that stale air out of there and get fresh air blowing through there. I've got a lot of fans in my greenhouse, and I could use more. The problem is if I add more fans, which would benefit everything, my plants would dry out in 2 days and I'd have to water, and I'm not home for 4 days. So there are definitely some challenges for me, and I've figured out how I can combat those challenges, and that's what you have to figure out. And that's going to come by killing some plants, unfortunately, or plants that don't do well, and then plants that do well. So, try more than one Phragmipedium, and do some different things. Good airflow will solve many problems such as soft rots, fungus, infections, and dead roots. So now we talk about light. Different species like varying amounts of brightness. Most frags prefer lower Cattleya light conditions around 3,000 foot candles. Schlemii, Besseyi, Fisheri, Manzurii prefer a little less, like 1,500 to 2,000. You get the most intense color and faster growth with brighter light. Why is my orchid not blooming? The number one question, well, the answer is probably light, light, light. Sufficient light is needed for photosynthesis, and which is the process where green plants use sunlight to synthesize their foods. Look at this, plants get 97% of their food by capturing the sunlight. Only 3% comes from fertilizer. And we've all heard that orchids don't need much fertilizer. And in the wild, nobody's fertilizing. Okay, they're only getting out there what decomposes around those roots. So light, if you're growing in too dim, you're going to have slower growth. On that same, while I was talking about on a growing dimmer, one thing you can do to cool your temperatures is add more shade cloth. Okay, what that's going to do is it's going to cut out a little bit of light, but you are going to cut down on some of your heat. So again, you got to play with what works for you in your environment. Some key items to consider is the intensity and duration of available light, whether it's outdoors, through windows, or from artificial sources. and take light readings over several times a day and average out the readings. So you can buy a cheap little light meter on the internet. I'm sure somebody in about your Orchid Society, wherever you're at, has a light meter. I have a light meter, and just take them different times of the day and then divide them out. Okay, if you're in a window, an east window is obviously you take full morning sun, 10, 11 o'clock, and then you're gonna get very little at the end. So again, average them out. A balance between light temperature and air movement must be achieved for the most successful growth and blooming. The more light, the better the bloom. Now, I want to push my plants to grow to their maximum potential. I've shown you a lot of my awarded Phragmipediums. I've got a lot of other awarded flowers. You've got to get that plant to perform and produce at its maximum potential. The most flower count, the most intense flower color that it's genetically capable of doing. And that's what a lot of this is tailored to, is my observations on what works to do that. Under lights, you can use longer day lengths to compensate for lower light intensity. So a 40-watt shop fixture, when with my light stand, run 18 hours a day, day length all year long. This summer, there's a 5-part article series in the Orchid magazines that addresses light in growing indoors. If you're not a member of the AOS, not only are the webinars incredible, but the magazines they're full of good information. And I find it fascinating, even though I don't grow in lights currently. I have grown all these plants under lights at some point. You want to use proper grow bulbs that have the right frequency and wavelength for plants. And then if you're growing indoors, an east-facing window with a few hours of morning sun, perfect. South-facing windows tend to have the harshest sunlight, but you get more of it over a portion of the day. I have a west window in my house, so I'm getting the harshest and hottest light. So you've got to have a sheer curtain or some light sheer thing to be your shade cloth to cut down on any direct sunlight after about 10 in the morning, okay? Now we roll into fertilizing and your pH. So you want to remember, we talked about what is the pH of your water. You've got to know that. What is your total dissolved solids and your sodium levels, okay? Choose your fertilizer based on your water quality, in particular your pH. The alkalinity and pH of your water has a large impact on the conditions that will prevail around the roots. It determines the availability of the nutrients that your plant can take in. On the pH scale, the ideal suggested range is 5 to 6.5, which is slightly acidic. Higher alkalinity is caused by naturally occurring calcium carbonate and bicarbonate. The more alkalinity your water, you want a fertilizer that will counteract that and cause an acidic reaction, okay? Rainwater and reverse osmosis water, which is what I use, and those are the purest waters, they have a low alkalinity and a low TDS, okay? My RO comes out at 10 parts per million. It takes all the minerals out, okay? So you must have a CalMag fertilizer to have calcium, magnesium in addition to your NPK. If your pH is too acidic, some of the nutrients become so soluble that concentrations become toxic to the plant. If it's too basic, some become unavailable and the plant can't absorb them, therefore causing a nutrient deficiency. For example, iron, the uptake decreases with a higher pH because it precipitates out the solution. Phosphorus precipitates out of the solution at a higher pH, and phosphorus intake further reduced above a pH of 7.2 because it converts to a less available form for that plant. And then nitrogen uptake can be indirectly affected because a low pH decreases nitrification. So you need to know your pH. And I test my pH frequently, which we'll talk about. So use a fertilizer with trace elements and fertilize weekly at 1/4 teaspoon per gallon with a target of 25 to 35 parts per million nitrogen in every water. I know you've heard them throw that out there as 125 parts per million a week, 25 parts per million this week. Frank Cervera in the wild with the species, he suggests only 10 to 20% of what's on the label. which is very little. So how do you know if you, so obviously every fertilizer you buy has an NPK value. It's written on the label. What you do is you divide 2 by the % of nitrogen on the label, and that will give you teaspoons per gallon for a continuous watering fertilization, okay? But you still want to flush with plain water about every 3rd time or 4th time. I fertilize 3 times in a row, then I do a plain RO flush to help get those salts out of there. Also, you want to fertilize year round because Phragmipediums don't rest. They have they grow continuously. During the winter with colder temperatures, they'll slow down. During the summer, they'll slow down, but they're still going to be growing. There's no perfect fertilizer, unfortunately, that I could say is your go-to fertilizer, okay? Since I use reverse osmosis, and if you use rainwater, the one that I like is the MSU Pure Water Special, which is developed by Michigan State University, or Ray Barkaloo has one that he calls K-Lite, which are excellent for your plain water. It takes water that has nothing and puts in the perfect balance of all the nutrients this plant's going to need, okay? This is a chart that was published in the Orchids magazine, February 2017. This shows the different Peters fertilizers that you can buy, and notice that it's based on the pH of your water, and that's how you figure out which of those Peters fertilizers to use. Now, okay, there's no such thing as a bloom booster. Ray Barkaloo is a chemist. I mean, he knows this stuff. And so there's no such thing as a bloom booster. It's actually a marketing gimmick. And what it does is bloom boosters add, if you look at the number on that label, you're going to have a really high phosphorus content, okay? However, a plant can only use as much phosphorus as it can take in. As long as your fertilizer is meeting that from the get-go, there is no need to overdo it with phosphorus. It's just going to wash out. The plant cannot take up any more. Excess nitrogen is what's causing your plant to not bloom. The more nitrogen you're giving it, the more it wants to grow. So as a grower, if we do everything right culturally, you allow the plant to grow and bloom to its maximum, okay? Do the culture right. If you're not overdoing it in the first place, there's simply no issue. There's nothing you can do to override the genetics in that respect. But cultural shortfalls likely will hinder the plant from reaching its potential. Some people say, oh, well, I use that and I get some blooming. Well, there's a reason. There's something you're doing, whether it's in your water or something, that's causing a deficiency in phosphorus or excessive nitrogen to start with. You can put, so now we're going into talking about repotting in the media. Again, there's no miracle mix. I have Phragmipediums that I have grown in everything, from rock wool to tree fern to straight clay balls to orchiata bark to the mix that I use, which is orchiata, sponge rock, and some charcoal. So you just have to understand how to use the medium. There's no perfect mix, and only what you find works best for your environment. Like I said, for me, I can't have too much air. I have to thicken up the mix a little bit. So some things that I do is I'll add some, and especially Marilyn Ledoux with Windy Hill, she'll add some rice hulls into the mix. You can add some sphagnum. You can buy that from repotme.com. You can add some sphagnum, okay, into your mix. You could do a seedling-sized orchiata and then mix in the classic also, or the super. Classic is your little bitty ones, which are your seedlings. Super is the big ones for cattleyas, the more like your medium, and then you have two in between. And of course, everybody needs a good little helper, right, to keep them company when they're when they're in the greenhouse and helping you repot. If you don't have one of those, maybe you could sweet talk a couple little rugrats into helping you out, and some little kids there. That was that's an inside shot of my greenhouse. You can see the blue drum in the back. I have several of these that I fill up my water. My girls in this, I have twin girls. They were a little younger in this picture. Now they're 17 years old and don't help me so much in the greenhouse anymore. But they were good helpers, and they do help us. So they love a fresh, airy mix that allows airflow to the roots. The type of mix depends on how often you want to water, how humid your growing conditions are, and the type of pot you use. Resist the urge to pot everything into a new mix. Then fine tune it if it's too wet or too dry. The organic matter can increase the acidity in the root zones, like sphagnum, peat, and bark have a pH of 4.4. As they age and degrade, it's going to get more acidic. And another wonderful thing about a Phragmipedium is they can be repotted anytime, even in bloom. I do it when I decide I'm repotting, whether that plant is in bloom or not, it gets repotted, and I've never have them abort their spike or their blooms. I mean, that's remarkable. So that's really, really cool. Here you see kind of my mix here on the left, which is Orchid, sponge rock, and little bitty pieces of charcoal. I'll add, basically if something's in a small pot, I'm using mostly seedling size with some small sponge rock or perlite. If I get into 3-4 inch pots, now I'm gonna start adding the next size Orchid or your fir bark or whatever. And then I do this, I add some sphagnum. If I'm doing some of the like the caudatums and stuff like that, since I need airflow, I don't want to put a whole lot of little bitty things into the mix, but what I'll do is I'll put some sphagnum because that will hold moisture longer. I've tried every single one of these here on the right, from lava rock to the to the tree fern.
Aaron, what do you use to determine when you repot a plant?
So you want to repot, and I think I've got it on one of the slides here. I repot pretty much every 1 to 2 years. And that's because when you're constantly, now, the great thing about Orchid, and that's just what I use, and it's not a miracle potting thing, but it does last longer and it doesn't break down as quick as fir bark. Okay, so I use Orchid, I can get away with a couple years on repotting. If you're using fir bark or especially sphagnum, and I use that too. Some of my plants, like especially the Bessiais, I like to use sphagnum mixed with sponge rock. Roots grow, Phragmipedium roots can grow partially submerged in water as long as they started growing that way. Okay, even though in the wild we don't have any that are found standing water, they can grow standing with their roots as long as they start growing that way. The media will break down and go stale quicker than in with your cattleyas or your dendrobiums. So I recommend repotting your Phragmipediums every year or at the 2-year mark at the latest, as that mix is going to go stale. Okay, I've repotted my cattleyas. I think recently I repotted one from 2012. It's been 9 years in that same pot. And Orchid, they grow closely spaced together on the rhizome. And I take it out, and it really hasn't decomposed a whole lot. It was in a bigger pot, so I had a whole lot of non-organic media to start with. But it's still going to go stale. I've left them in there for 3 and 4 years, and I see a decline in the growth of the plant. They like to be repotted. And like I said, you'll only see growth increase after repotting. If you got a plant that's struggling, repot it, see what's going on with your root zone. And if you have a plant that refuses to bloom, try the brighter light. If not, repot it. So semi-hydroponics is very popular and successful. That's the picture on the left, and I have one here you can touch and feel. This, as you can see, it holds 1 inch of water basically at the bottom. Down at the bottom of a semi-hydro, this is just a microwavable container you can buy at Sam's, really, just for what is it?
A deli container.
Yeah, deli container. Yeah. So what I do though is I cut holes, multiple holes at that 1-inch mark all the way around it. So it'll hold a little bit of water when you first water at the bottom. Whatever roots eventually grow down into that area will be fine, and it's situated for growing in water. The other thing you can use, or unfortunately, I'm not sure you can get these anymore, but there's something called porous clay cool pots. Okay, and also regular clay pots. That's because clay breathes. Okay, it evaporates air. Now these cool pots, the lady that used to do them no longer makes them, unfortunately. Most of my Bessiais and the cooler growers I have in these cool pots. They have a cone in the center. Well, you see it in the picture there on the right for those of you online. And I have one here you can look at, kind of give you an idea, but the important thing is that it's made out of a very porous clay that evaporates. So you're getting air is being forced in through the holes at the bottom. So you're getting air movement in the root zone, even if you're not watering. And that particular pot shows about a 10-degree drop in temperature at the root zone. Okay, and that's why I like to use them. The other ones I like to use are these air cone pots. The reason I like these is they're a little bit taller of a pot, but they have a tall slit on each side. And if you're going to set it in a saucer of water, okay, and the ones I set in a saucer of water are ones that I just repotted, my bark is not well wet, I need to do it every day, but now I'm about to go for 4 days. I sit it in a saucer of water. There's no roots down there, so I'm not worried about rotting any roots, but it keeps it wet. But you've got to have the water to be below the top of the slit. You can't take a pot with holes at the bottom and set it in a saucer of water if you really want to do well, because now you're suffocating all air movement that would come up from the bottom of your pot. The roots need air. When you're repotting, so the first one here is actually my Bessiai slalom, a piece of it when I repotted it. I use straight sphagnum mixed with a whole lot of sponge rock. How much? Well, how fast is it going to dry out for you? Okay, I can't tell you that because it just depends on your growing environment. If you're at home every day and you want to water every other day, if you like watering, water it every day, every other day. Okay. The middle picture, excuse me. Some of the Phragmipediums tend to grow up and out of the pot. And you have basically the bare stem. Excuse me. Goodness. What you can do is you will never get an aerial root on a Phragmipedium. Okay? They just cannot grow in air. They have to be in the mix. So when you have one that's growing above the mix, up out of the pot, I wrap this sphagnum moss around the stem and then wrap a twisty tie up underneath it to keep it secure. And when I water that as well as the base of the plant. And this plant right here, I brought it specifically to show you. Let me see if I can get it for people online. This is one that was growing from a side picture way up out of the pot. I would have lost every new root that this put out if I did not put this little pack of sphagnum on it. And as you can tell, I mean, it's got a beautiful growth. All that was grown up out of the pot. Okay, that is really important. And Bessiai that's one of the downsides to Bessiai is they can tend to grow up and out of the pot, or they can. On the picture on the right, that root, they had a root in there. If you right in the center, you can see a little white root there. Again, if it's growing at the top and out, I put a little bit of sphagnum on it, and that'll be enough to keep it moist and from exposed to the air. Even if that little sphagnum dries, it's still got some protection. That little root's going to keep growing. If I didn't do that, that root would abort.
Do you stabilize the plant, or is the media forced in to make sure it's solid?
I do not force the media in. When I'm repotting, what I'll do is I'll take out the old plant. I do knock off the old stuff. Okay, this is not one that you want to pot up unless you've used all inorganic media. because it's gonna rot. This is a wet environment. So I knock all that over, the old media off. If I'm going into the same pot, set it right back in, and then add the media and just keep banging on the sides and banging it on the table. That way it works its way on down. I'm going to a bigger pot, but I never pack it in. This sphagnum right here, you can see it's very loose and very fluffy. Unlike what we do, like when the Cattleyas, when we're replating and stuff like that, or compotting, is we're packing that sphagnum in that tight. Frags like it loose and airy. So here's another plant of mine that this one grew out the pot. Well, they had a stem that was growing up. I wrapped it, similar to this one right here. And I mean, look at the foliage, it's gorgeous. I mean, this plant didn't skip a beat. If the top of your mix is dry, you've waited too long, okay? The ones I have here were all just repotted. The bark is gonna be dry on them. They've got to be watered every day right now until your bark becomes kind of acclimated for wet conditions. But if you see it dry on the top, it's time to water, even if it's still moist underneath, because a lot of roots are coming out right under this stuff right here. As far as diseases and pests, the #1 killer of our Phragmipediums are the different rots. This is the enemy of frags. Everybody has grown frags, has lost them to rot. Rots are highly contagious and usually spread by splashing water, contaminated fingers, and tools. You must increase your airflow on that plant immediately. If I have one with rot, it goes right in front of the fan. What I do is I'll pull off, if you see this picture here in the bottom right, I'll pull off. If it's one that starts from the outside, I'll pull off and see how far in I get to good, viable, healthy tissue. And as you can see, it only took peeling off that one to get to good. The one here on the left, it's not, it's in the ones here on the left are wet. You can see some little juicy spores on it. Of course, these are not my plants now, right? But but anyway, again, this comes with experience and having this happen. And this is what basically what they look like. Rot is not to be confused with the normal senescence of the leaf. Okay, rot always starts at the base of a leaf and works its way out. Okay, the normal senescence of a leaf starts at the leaf tip and works its way to the plant. The plant is absorbing all the nutrients out of that leaf in the old growth. One thing for paths and frags is do not pull those old leaves that are senescing off the plant. And H.P. Norton specifically, I remember him telling me, do not do that because your slippers really need to pull, they're pulling nutrients out of that for a reason. Unless I'm going to a show, I'll leave them on there. So you will, walking in my greenhouse, you're going to see the old leaves drying up or senescing. Go back to the previous slide. Notice that the rot is always starting from the base, working its way up. Notice the tips of the leaves are green. That's how we know we have rot versus the normal drying up of a leaf. Now, this is something that I use. It's not a miracle product. Okay, it will not solve 100% of your rot issues. However, I've had the most success using this particular product for rots. You can get crown rots, okay? So this is what they call dragon's blood, and it's sap from the Croton lechleri tree in South America. It's actually used for medicinal purposes there, but it's said to cause an immune system-like response in plants, and it prevents rot. So you can buy this off of Amazon, eBay. Just make sure you get the one that's alcohol free. They add alcohol in it to pull out certain properties, and you don't want that. You really want the raw sap. If you have crown rot, you see it starting to rot in the center of your plant, and this works with a phalaenopsis. Add 3, 4, 5 drops to the dead center of that plant, and it hopefully will stop the rot on that growth. You're not going to save that growth, but if there's any healthy tissue, hopefully those leaves will stay green and it won't continue in killing out that particular growth. If on this slide, what I'll do is I'll pull off the bottom leaves and I'll put a little bit of that stuff and smear it on the base there. Unfortunately, I have lost plants even with treating with this, but this has had the best success for me, and it's something most people don't know about. And those of us on the Slipper Orchid Alliance, Slipper Orchid Forum, that's how I found out about that. I've been using that for years, and it's my go-to product. Here are all the other rot treatment tips that I've come across. I have tried every single one of these. Some work to some degree. One thing you definitely want to do at the bottom here is repot it to a looser mix. Okay. The reason it's getting rot is the water is either sitting there because you don't have enough air movement, or there's no air in the roots and you've lost the airflow to the roots. Take a picture of this. Google this on the internet. I mean, you know, there's all different how much of each one to do. There are different things you can try, but the main thing, like I mentioned, increase the airflow and repot it to a looser mix if you know that it's an old mix. And as far as pests go, there's not really many. What is it? You need me to go back? Take pictures? Okay.
Thank you for responding to your disease.
Yeah. Here's the things that are living in our greenhouse besides the plants. So in general, the Phragmipediums, there's not a whole lot of pest issues that occur. The main thing you're going to see are the snails and slugs because it's wet all the time. Centipedes, I'll see some centipedes which eat the bark, which help it deteriorate quicker, unfortunately. But I don't really see, every now and then an aphid will come in or a thrip will chew on a flower or something. But there's not a whole lot there. I'm not going to go into treating pests and diseases. There's so much you can do, so many different products beyond the scope of today. However, I want to mention a couple things that are really important. So it's a misconception to treat plants for a pest once or twice, okay? Especially when you're using a systemic or a translaminar pesticide. And you must understand that a pest infection involves eggs, larvae, and adults, okay? So most pesticides only kill adults. So you just treat it one time, you're only going to kill the adults. You still got all the larvae, you still got the eggs that are about to hatch. And also, typically, you're not 100% of the adults are not going to be killed, allowing the survivors to reproduce and carry on the infestation. All you need is one little scale insect to survive your treatment, and eventually it will build into a whole nother issue again. Typically, apply a pesticide this is what works for me, every 7 to 10 days for 4 to 6 consecutive weeks, and then alternate the pesticide chemical classes after 2 consecutive applications. Don't use the same one 4, 5, 6 times in a row. You've got to change the chemical class because most likely a pesticide, there will always be some little resistant pest that will be resistant to that particular chemical. I remember when Safari came out, it was the savior of our scale problem. Well, one little scale was kind of immune to Safari. All right, and all it took is that one immune scale, one resistant scale, to start reproducing all these resistant babies. And now you got a bunch of resistant babies or scale population that won't Safari, for example. I'm just using that as a product. That's a phenomenal product for scale, by the way. I do now the natural options, which are safer insecticidal soap and neem oil. Yes, I use neem oil, and I do not have problems using neem oil. I spot treat it with it, okay? You just don't want to use these above 90 degrees. It's kind of a safe estimate. So if I'm going to apply my natural soaps and insecticidal and neem oil, I do it first thing in the morning or in the afternoon once the temperature drops. Obviously, the morning is the best time to do it so it can be dry before it heats up. The great thing about natural options is they're not resistant, okay? Scale cannot handle, so this soap and oil smothers them. There's no pesticide involved. Anyway, that I could do a whole presentation on treatment for scale, and that's beyond today, of course. All right, so we're finishing up here. The last thing I want to talk about are additives and boosters. Okay, so I first started using Super Thrive. You can get it at any of your Home Depot and Lowe's. However, kelp is a better product. Now, Kelp Max and Kelp Act, which is a kelp extract from First Rays, right now it's going by the name Kelp Max. It started as Kelp Act and it's going to go back to Kelp Act. But First Rays, if you Google them, that's where I buy this product from. Today, he donated a couple of these for our door prize raffle here. That 2 of you will win for a free sample of this, and it's a whole quart over there. But basically, kelp products contain plant hormones, namely auxins, cytokinins, and gibberellins. So Kelp Max, what's neat about it is that auxin dominated. Okay, it carries the kelp that they use is auxin dominated, and it supports prolific root formation. Okay, the increase in root tip growth leads to increased levels of cytokinins, which are hormones that are produced in the root tips of your plants. So then that provides stronger top growth, which is what the cytokinins do. It helps the plant be more resistant to drought and stress. It's great for treating seedlings, and after I repot and compot and repotting, I always water it with a Kelp Max. You do this 1 time a month, 1 tablespoon per gallon. And again, if you don't address your temperature issue, you don't address your air circulation issue and the light issues, this is not gonna, this definitely helps, but you got to have your culture right first. These are your little boosts, okay? I want a vibrant root system. If you remember from that slide, a few slides back, I had a picture of one I took out of the pot, and you saw all those roots. They're dense roots. But this is a product that I've used for a long time, and I do have some pamphlet, some brochures that I'll give out to everybody that's here. If you want to look into it, this is something that I do. Epsom salt, which is magnesium sulfate. Magnesium is a major building block in the formation of chlorophyll. And then Epsom salt, because it's got sulfate, contains sulfur, which is an important nutrient as well. The MSU fertilizer, or kelp K-Lite, is a complete balanced fertilizer, okay? But again, that's if you're using reverse osmosis or rainwater. If your fertilizer does not contain magnesium, Bill Toms, for those of you that have been around long enough, we had Bill Toms do a Louisiana circuit. He recommends a monthly treatment of 3/4 to 1 teaspoon per gallon Epsom salts. Now, my MSU fertilizer has the perfect balance of calcium to magnesium, and it has magnesium in it. However, once a month, Bill said it would still benefit me to do a 1 time a month, 1/4 of a teaspoon per gallon treatment of Epsom salts, and I still do it to this day. How much it helps, I don't know, but I do that, and I know it helps on some level. So I usually do it as one of my 3 fertilizings. Another product I use is a silicon supplement. In the Orchids magazine, within the last couple of years, there was a Sue Bottom article actually on silicon. And you can buy it, the product is called Protect, made by Dynagrow. And this is something I use. And silicon is known to have a beneficial effect on plants by strengthening the cell walls and making them thicker, stronger, and more resistant to abiotic stresses such as drought and cool temperatures, and biotic stresses such as pests and diseases, giving us thicker leaves and stronger stems. Okay. Dissolved silica is available to our orchids when the roots absorb the water directly. Reverse osmosis removes all silica. Okay. Now, here's the thing. When you add this product to your water, it's going to drive a big increase in your pH. Okay, that's what silica does when we add it to our water. So you need to monitor your pH. And there's a product called pH Down. Google that. And then that, you can use that to bring, you have to just figure out by doing pH test to bring it back to the balance of 5 to 6.5. This gives you cold, like during the winter, it helps support cold tolerance to your orchids. And during the summer, it helps prevent them from the heat stress. Denny Haas over in Houston was the one that first, years ago, probably 15, 20 years ago, told me about this, and I use it. But again, you need to be able to test your pH either from the little test strips, or you can buy an aquarium pH test kit, pH kit, where you just put do a little water sample, put the little drops in there, you read the color, and it tells you. It's super simple. I mean, it's really easy.
How often do you, is it recommended?
Every single watering, I put this in there. It's a continuous feed into my water.
You add it to.
I add it to my water. So again, like I said, I use reverse osmosis. I mix it in a big drum. The first thing I do is I add my this at a weak solution.
How much?
1/4 of a teaspoon, but it's on the label. If this is something you want to try, again, this isn't going to solve all your problems. These are little extra bonus things that could help.
You fertilize that, yes.
Well, for me, it doesn't add a whole lot on your TDS. So I start with 0 on my total dissolved solids. I add this, and then I add my fertilizer. Well, then I add pH down, and then I add my fertilizer. Is that what you mean?
Can I measure this with my?
You can't measure your silica, but no, and not your TDS meter. You need to know it's going to affect your pH. It does cause a bump on your TDS meter. It does go up. But again, if you're starting with pure water, you don't even have to mess with this. But 1/4 of a teaspoon per gallon is all it takes. And I do it at every watering. And my Vandas make it through the winter. My Phragmipedium Bessii and all these cooler growers make it through the summer. Is that the reason? Not directly, definitely not. It's all those culture issues. But these are some little things that you just remember for later. I'm not going to say go rush out and buy any of these products other than this Kelp Max. That's probably the most beneficial thing you can do once a month if you really want to try something. And Epsom salts would be a really easy, cheap option to do once a month. And Bill Toms, for those of you who don't know him, he grew spectacular specimen plants. A few other culture notes before we wrap up. Every greenhouse or every growing environment has microclimates. Fidget with your area, okay? Sometimes you move a troublesome plant a few feet, it could make a big difference. Map your growing area. You'll notice you have some areas that are cooler, some areas that are warmer, drier, that stay wet, that are really bright and really shady, okay? Everybody's growing environment has these different microclimates. Fidget, move things around. If something's not doing well, try it in a different place. But the most important thing is persistence, okay? You got to keep trying and stay determined. Buy from different vendors. I want to grow certain plants. I will do it if I can, and I'm going to try. Start by growing what you know should do well. That way you get a little confidence boost. You see that you can succeed. I didn't say it earlier. Normally I do say it at the beginning of my presentation. The first time I ever saw a Phragmipedium was in Bogota, Quito, Ecuador, at their botanical gardens there. And I'd known what the lady slippers were, but anyway, in their botanical gardens, they had a big exhibit of these Phragmipedium Bessii. And I love the red color of a flower. It's hard for us here in the South to have red flowers, although I do have a number of red callias. But I was just taken back by just how brilliant that flower was. And if this was April and May and June, I would have some here for you to see. But anyway, I just said that's got to be something I want to grow. Now, for those of you who don't know where Quito is, you're up at 9,000 feet elevation. Okay, so it's cool, it's cold, or cool. And then I mentioned that when I was living in Houston to Denny Haas, who I used to go to his greenhouse and And he's like, oh, I got a bunch of them right over there in that tray. Now, they weren't Besseyi hybrids. They might have been low-level Besseyis. They had a lot of longifolium and claudotums and Pierceii, but they were doing well. And then Orchid Babies was obviously out of Alabama. They started coming to all the shows here in Louisiana. And that was where I bought my first Phragmipedium, was from Orchid Babies. And it was a longifolium cross. And I kept it alive and I kept it growing. And then I just had to go into all the high level Besseyi's. And that's when I started getting, you know, I wanted to grow some Draculas and all these other things that probably shouldn't be growing here. And I got my wet wall. And for those of you, you know, that Hal's been to my greenhouse, it's grown a lot since you first been there, but it's a really tight, very humid. I don't get a whole lot of evaporation in my greenhouse, and it works for me. And I have little different microclimates that, like I said, that I've made it work. So this is my latest Phragmipedium that got awarded last weekend in Alexandria. Again, you can see that it's got longifolium in the background because of the protuberances on the side of the pouch. So you want to keep them as cool as possible in hot weather, okay? Keep them moist and don't let them dry out. Good water quality, rainwater or reverse osmosis is definitely best. Lots of air movement, bright and direct light between 1,500, 3,000 foot candles. Repot into an airy mix that'll retain moisture. Treat rot immediately and make adjustments. And then focus on watering at the base of the plant, not the crown. This will help with rot as well. Don't worry about if you get water on the leaves. Don't worry about if it splashes up. Just you practice by just watering the base of the plant. I think you'll do best long term. And I end with the one, this one I got awarded earlier in the year. And that's pretty much what I have. Any questions that I didn't cover today? We asked them through. What's that?
Can you go back to the last screen, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
So, what's the pH of the rainwater?
Well, I use reverse osmosis, so it's around 5-ish, in the 5 range. It's kind of, I use just a liquid dropper, so it's in the 5-point something range. When I add, and MSU doesn't really change it. Okay, if I did not add Protect, which is silicon, you're fine. I just want to add that. I'm willing to spend the money because of the plants that I grow. I want to do everything I can to succeed. Do you have to do all that? No. Okay, but I laid it all out there for you. Hopefully you'll take some of this to heart and maybe try some different things. And this will help all your orchid growing.
Where do you live?
I grew up in Hahnville, just outside New Orleans, but now I live in the central part of the state in Harrisonburg, which is Catahoula Parish. From here, you go up to Natchez, then you head straight west into Louisiana. What you got, Zach?
You mentioned wrapping some of the stolonifers hybrids in moss to get them to grow. Have you ever tried that shallow tray method?
I don't have room for a tray. You know, in John Morcott up in Canada, he especially for Besseyi. I mean, when I say I don't have room, I have plants that are sitting on all my drum, or trays that are sitting on my drums, trays that are sitting on buckets that I have to move around every time I water. I mean, I am at that capacity where I'm way beyond where I should be, and it affects the evaporation. You know, and I really need more air movement. I really need to thin it out. And I am going to extend my greenhouse here pretty soon just to have more room for my bandas. Yes, ma'am.
Do you put peanuts in the bottom of your pot?
Yeah, that's a good question. I do. So she asked about peanuts on the bottom of the pot. I do. They don't decompose, especially all my cattleyas, dendrobiums, but even in Phragmipediums, I'll put 2, 3 at the bottom. If I'm doing a seedling, I might put 1 at the bottom. You know, if I'm doing, sometimes like this one doesn't have any. I mean, if you want to look at some of these later, I mean, it's solid root mass in here. I couldn't divide this plant without destroying it. And usually that's what happens if I try to divide some of these frags. And now I really don't have room for these big giant plants, so I make divisions of them.
What's your best advice if you do have one? I mean, we had a hurricane, our greenhouses were terrible, that decided instead of growing bigger, now it's growing smaller. So it's apparently sulking. So what's your best advice when you have a plant that's sulking like that?
Well, again, I would have to be in your greenhouse or in your growing environment to really give you any legitimate advice. And it's hard to say because what I would do is you could move it into a shadier area and just make sure it doesn't dry out. You know, if you've lost the roots on it, put it in a bag. I gave Hal a division of something today. This is a great for if you make a division on your back bulbs, put it in an empty Ziploc bag, leave it open and tack it up to your bench in your greenhouse and leave it alone. If it's got the will to live, then it'll start putting out new roots.
So don't sphagnum, just a plant.
Plant. Yep. Or you can set it into a clay pot on your bench. But Bill Toms uses just a gallon Ziploc bag, put your division in there. Don't water it, just let it be. And then you'll start seeing new roots come out. Yep, it's great. Did we have any online questions that people had texted at all? Or?
No, I didn't see any
Okay.
online questions.
All right.
But I do think that was an outstanding presentation.
I will say that this is about 11 years worth of, when I first made this presentation to the Central Louisiana Orchid Society in 2010, I'd been growing Phragmipediums for a few years, and I really wanted to learn more about them. And the first presentation I did, I took every species, every manuscript, everything I could find on these species and put it into a slide. So I didn't do that to you. I didn't subject you to that today, thankfully. Unfortunately, way back when, I did subject all of our members to that. And I covered every species, how to identify those species. But that would be more apt for a specialist course on species. Okay. So what I did was I just featured the most important species for our warm climates. But I've reworked that Phragmipedium presentation over the years. And I know Frank's been on me for years to try to get me here to present on it, but it's never worked out for my schedule. So I'm glad it finally did, and a lot has come. I mean, my presentation today is much more evolved than it was 10 years ago, and obviously 10 more years of experience with it.
Erin, I'm ready to win my door prize.
All right, so we got some. I got 3 longifoliums over there I brought. That I donated, and then we have first rate. Let me do this. Let me get this out.
So while they're finishing, get that stuff together.
If everybody will take one of these and just pass the rest around.
I'm not sure we've decided all that. It is recorded, so we'll have to answer that. We'll communicate out. While he's passing that stuff out, it's just past 11:30. All right, the plan was after this, folks are going to take a lunch break. The judges will be doing the judging, and then we'll reconvene at 1 o'clock for the start of the next presentation. So, free to do which of those things you want to do, something else you have planned, but we'll be breaking after they finish up here with the door prize, and we'll be back at 1 o'clock.
And also, if you are interested, there is a room reserved that you can do.
For the Zoom folks, I don't know, could y'all hear all that?
Yes, we did.
Okay, so we've got reconvening at 1 o'clock.
May I ask a question about that?
Sure.
Should we remain on Zoom
I'll
or
let you-
sign
if
out
you
and come
want-
back in?
Yeah, you can do it either way. I'm going to leave it online, and I will
Okay.
readmit anybody who requests being readmitted when we get ready to start. Maybe
Okay.
I'll be 10 or 15 minutes before we start.
All right, sure do appreciate it.
Thank you.
So keep in mind that since these plants are mostly true tropicals and they come from rainforests that get rain all year round, they're going to enjoy higher humidity and ample rain, ample watering. Okay. So here's the kind of a range. Here's where Papua New Guinea, the island of New Guinea, where it sits just north of Australia. And the natural range of these plants go all the way out here into the Indonesia, the northern parts of Australia, and out into the Pacific, into Samoa. This is the island of Papua New Guinea. You can see this topographical shows there are mountain ranges here. We know there's lots of tectonic activity in that region. And so land masses have been pushed up very high. There's high elevations, well over 4,000 or 5,000 feet. There are no orchids at that elevation, but they are literally found in every region that's yellow and green. Okay. So they are tropical. Papua New Guinea sits practically on the equator, as you can see here. So they are true tropicals. They enjoy a very, very narrow diurnal range all year long. There's always intense sunlight. And for a majority of the year, the sun is very, very high in the sky. For us, we have the seasonal shift of the sun. In the wintertime now, it's low in the sky. I guess mid-December, 20th of December, we'll reach our shortest day of the year, and the sun will be as low in the sky. But for Papua New Guinea, the sun is nearly always up high. And as a true tropical, the temperature ranges are very, very close. And it is always, as an island, there's always tropical breezes, always breezes blowing, okay? And the consequence of this is that plants never really stop growing. They're always producing new foliage. They go through these growth cycles one after another. And what we find in here, even in Florida, and I'm sure it would be true for you in Baton Rouge and South Texas areas, that the plants, they grow very, very quickly, and they can double in size easily in 1 or 2 years. And like I said, they have a very narrow diurnal range because of that tropical influence. So with the light, as a general rule, Laturias are very bright light, bright filtered light. They are epiphytes, they're growing in the trees, but most of the time they're getting very, very bright light, okay? So when I say bright, I mean really bright. So 3,000 to 4,000 foot candles, that's 50% shade, 60% shade. That's pretty bright. That's as bright as the Bandus like it here in Florida. They're very, very bright. They do like it is most are in the 2,500 to 3,000 foot candles, filtered light through the tree branches, but when it's all relative, right? And so even those that are considered shady, lower light growers, they're actually pretty bright. So 2,000 to 3,000 foot candles, that's your typical Cattleya light conditions, and those are the ones that are considered the shady or low light ones. So keep that in mind with the light as we talk through the species. Okay. For water, it is tropical. There's water all over the place. There's ample water and moisture. rising air currents, like from the mountains, there's always, moist air from the sea blowing across the island, traveling up the mountains. And as these moist air cools, it forms clouds and it rains nearly every single day. So plants never dry out. So that's something we need to think about. We need to be conscious of when we're growing here, that they get regular water, that we let them, they get ample drainage, but they do not completely dry out. The roots are very sensitive to being totally dry. So for nutrition, plants receive low doses of nutrition virtually every time it rains. And so if you have a situation where you have a fertilizer injector, that would provide the best kind of nutrition that mimics nature, is low doses of fertilizer every time it rains. Otherwise, a good time release fertilizer will give you that low dosage of fertilizer every time you irrigate, every time you water. Now, so in cultivation, the key here is to mimic nature as closely as we can. Okay, so this is the triangle, the pyramid of what the plants need. We know they need light, air, and water, and good nutrition. And our goal is to mimic nature as close as we possibly can. The most important cultural factor to good blooming is light. Let me get a lozenge here. So direct sun in the morning is fine. That works out really, really well because you can get very bright light and you don't have to worry about the heat. Air, ensure plants have ample air and movement at all times, like they are in nature, and the trees and on the tropical islands are always getting good air movement. For water, because they're getting water all the time, we really want to use the best water quality that we can. The lower the dissolved solids, the better. Reverse osmosis water and rainwater would be perfect. And otherwise, if you're using a well water or city water, you have to make sure that you have really good flushing, that we don't allow salts to accumulate in the root zone. And we want to reduce the watering when plants stop growing in the cooler weather, but that doesn't mean stop watering, okay? It just means that we reduce, they're not growing as fast, they're not transpiring as much water because it's cooler, but the root zone remains, there is still moisture in the root zone and there's plenty of humidity. So nutrition, we want nutrition to mirror the watering. So when there's ample water, we want ample nutrition to go with it. And when you're reducing watering in the wintertime, we're reducing the fertilizer as well. And like I said, RO water is perfect. And if you don't have the opportunity for RO, then the weekly nutrition regimen is best. Time release, we can use time release too. So again, reduce fertilizer in the winter time and flush accumulated salts. Now, for media, the Laturias, they do prefer to be slightly underpotted. So they really like to have the roots cramped. It's not uncommon at all. And you'll see some examples here in the slideshow where there's huge plant and the whole just giant plant in a 6-inch pot. I think the largest pot I've ever seen one of these in is maybe an 8-inch pot. And we want to use very well drained media, bark, charcoal, and aggregate. So this helps the roots get the oxygen that they need, and they don't rot from being soggy and moist. They stay moist, but they're not soggy. We want to repot before the media breaks down completely and compost and becomes soggy. And repotting can be anytime the roots are growing. And as true tropicals, as long as it's warm enough, they will be growing. Pardon me. So drainage is the key. Lots and lots of drainage, okay? Did I emphasize this enough? Very, very important. The plants get lots and lots of water, and so drainage is important, equally important. If you choose to grow on slab culture, you may. Cork, tree fern, hardwood baskets are okay, but just remember, plants that are grown this way, they dry faster, and you're going to need to water that much more. Okay. So now that's kind of the horticultural part of it, culture. Let's look at the horticultural species of interest. And of course, Dendrobium spectabile, that's the one that a lot of people you either love it or you hate it. It's the goblin orchid or the grand dendrobium. It's the orchid only a mother could love. Every single flower is different. They're all twisted. Very interesting colors. The base color is always a chartreuse or green color and has markings on the sepals and petals, and then darker purple veination in the lip. Also called the goblin.